and my boss. Just for note, we are recording today's session, so that's just something that you can keep in mind. And so we'll also be taking notes because we definitely want to have some very practical solutions coming out of this roundtable discussion. So Shannique, you ready?
I mean, I am as ready as one can be to give opening remarks.
Just as a note, Shannique, I really like that painting in your background. It would look very nice in my apartment.
Okay. All right.
So go ahead, Shannique.
Good morning, everyone. I think I saw mostly a lot of familiar names. So I'm Shannique Bowden, Executive Director at the Jamaica Youth Advocacy Network. I thought it very apt that today I wear this lovely shirt that was gifted to me by HFJ about a month ago. Right. But welcome and hello. So basically we are here today, as Jonathan said, to talk about front of package warning labels. And generally for us at JYAN, this is an area that we have been spending the last couple of months trying to understand. As most persons probably know, we started doing nutrition work around March 2021, and it was information overload. And so while our focus have mainly been on the school nutrition policy and advocating for the finalization and implementation of the school nutrition policy, we of course have been trying to keep abreast of all the different healthy food policies that are being advocated for both in Jamaica and the wider Caribbean. And so there's been quite a bit that has been happening around the front of package warning labels. We've supported, I think, at least 2 initiatives that were done by the Healthy Caribbean Coalition across the region to bring awareness around front of package warning labels. And so we are mainly doing this session today to one, sort of bring in some different persons into the conversation to one, sensitize about what front of package warning labels are, why we need them, what all the hoorah and what's the word, alabaloo and all that jazz is about. And also two, to sort of understand what has been happening with the advocacy around front of package warning labeling in the Caribbean, especially as it relates to the recently concluded CARICOM process. And from there, what are the options available for Jamaica and what is that we can do next, especially as youth advocates, to continue to advocate for this initiative. And so we have 2 very main presentations today. To one, again, introduce the topic and just give some context or background information, and then 2, to also guide us through the process to date as the case may be. And we'll also be just having some very rich discussions around the way forward and what are the avenues for further advocacy. So by all means, we're all friends here. Do not hesitate at all to chime in on the chat, and especially during the discussion parts to really, open your mic and chime in, especially if you've been involved in the process and you know quite a bit more than myself or anyone else on the call. And we're just very welcome to have a very open, rich discussion about this issue and see how best we can, chart the way forward. Thank you.
All right, I so want to thank Shannique so much. So before we get into the program, just for those of you who are joining and you might not be familiar with Jamaica Youth Advocacy Network, we are a human rights and youth-led organization. We focus on youth development, human rights, particularly for it affects children and young people. So you might also be wondering, why is front of package warning labels important to us? So a large part of the advocacy work that we do involves healthcare. So we have done sexual and reproductive health. We have done mental health work, general access for adolescents to healthcare in Jamaica and good health. So a part of that is nutrition. I think nutrition is one of the fundamental pillars of general healthcare. So that's one of the, we think it's so important to step into that arena and to ensure that we have a fulsome discussion about health. And specifically front of package warning labels for young people. We know that we consume a lot of ultra-processed foods because, we're constantly on the go, you're at school. And we think that it's important for young people to be able to easily access the nutrition facts. And that's what we say, put it at the front. Let young people know what is harmful to them, what might be good for them. And so that's one of the reasons why we're having this discussion here. But JYAN, we largely focus on we are human rights speciality, but we have partners, and that's why we have our lovely partners, people like the Global Health Advocacy Incubator. We have Bloomberg. We also have Heart Foundation of Jamaica. We have our executive director here, the executive director of Heart Foundation here, Ms. Barbara McGraw, and the rest of the Heart Foundation team. Rachel, the one who had the lettuce, lettuce and tomato in our egg taco. She is the senior advisor for the Global Health Advocacy Incubator for the Caribbean. We also have CARE here, that's the Caribbean Institute for Health Research. So there are some of our partners who have worked hard with us. We also have the National Secondary Schools Council and the Jamaica Union of Tertiary Students who have worked alongside with us, and we have been pushing, healthy food policies for young people and students. All right. So we're going to hear some more about them. We have the Heart Healthy Caribbean Coalition, so you're going to hear from them as well. And they're going to be telling you from a regional perspective, because I think this is a regional issue and deserves some regional solutions. Sorry, 1 second. All right, so we will be starting as we are going to head on to our first presentation, and that's a crash course in front of package warning labels. All right, and that crash course is going to be done by Danielle Walwyn. As I spoke about Healthy Caribbean Coalition, Danielle Walwyn from the Healthy Caribbean Coalition will leading us in this crash course. I don't want everybody to take notes because there will be prizes after this presentation. So make sure you take notes and you learn a little bit. And Danielle is a ravers, by the way. She's a big dancer. So I don't know if she's going to treat us to anything in our presentation today.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with you. A huge thank you to JYAN for inviting me to deliver a crash course on front of package warning labeling. My name is Danielle Walwyn, and I'm the Advocacy Officer at the Healthy Caribbean Coalition. And so I'm really looking forward to the discussion. My main purpose here today is to help you answer these two questions. What is octagonal front of package warning labeling, and why do we need them? So I'm really hopeful by the end of this presentation that you will be able to answer these questions. But before we get into the issue, I really wanted to invite us to pause for a moment and think of these two things and reflect on them throughout the presentation. So at the forefront of this issue of front of package warning labeling is non-communicable diseases. Apologies for you have another guest attending the meeting today. Sorry about that. Hopefully you can still hear me clearly. So one of the primary issues that we're talking about here is non-communicable diseases. And in 2007, CARICOM leaders would have signaled regionally and internationally their intention to address non-communicable diseases. And when I'm talking about non-communicable diseases, I'm talking about diabetes and hypertension, etc. I think some of us might be familiar. They would have signaled their interest in addressing non-communicable diseases, and they would have had this monumental meeting and what we now know as the Port of Spain Declaration. And this would have been critical. Sorry, excuse me one moment. So sorry about that. And we would have had the Port of Spain Declaration, and that again, CARICOM ministers would have signaled regionally and internationally the importance of addressing non-communicable diseases. So when we're talking about front of package warning labeling, things can get a little confusing and have become a bit convoluted, but at the center of it, we need to remember that we are talking about non-communicable diseases. We are talking about people's health. Soon after this 2007 Port of Spain Declaration would have occurred, in 2010, we would have had the very first standards for pre-packaged foods. And in 2018, we would have revised those standards to include the octagonal front of package warning labeling, which we're talking about a bit more today. And I know your second presenter, Ms. Kimberly Benjamin, will go into greater detail on that process. So again, the one thing I want you to remember is non-communicable diseases. And the second thing I want you to remember is that that behind a non-communicable disease is a person. I think we often forget about that. We talk about non-communicable diseases, we talk about the statistics, but we really do need to remember the people behind that. I think all of us on the call have someone or know someone very close to us that lives with a non-communicable disease, or you might be like Natasha on the screen here, who is 16 years old, whose mother lives with diabetes, whose father lives with hypertension, and she's often the one that is purchasing foods for her family. So we have to remember the persons behind that non-communicable disease, and further, their circle, the people who take care of them, and how some of these policies, front of package warning labeling included, that we're talking about, not only just help that person living with a non-communicable disease, but their community. So I just want you to keep those two things in mind. And as we're continuing to talk about non-communicable diseases, every time I mention the word, I encourage you to think of that person who you know lives with a non-communicable disease, okay? All right, we're gonna take a step back. We're gonna look regionally. We know that non-communicable diseases, NCDs, cause 75% of mortality and 73% of premature mortality in the Caribbean region. The Caribbean has the highest mortality related to, the highest mortality related to these non-communicable diseases, and the highest rates of overweight and obesity. 1 in 3, I think we've heard that statistic over and over again, 1 in 3 of our children in the Caribbean are living with overweight and obesity. And we understand that there are many factors that relate to the development of obesity and development of non-communicable diseases, but we really do need to take a moment to appreciate that the unhealthy diet is the #1 risk factor for obesity and NCDs. Which brings us to our diets. We have had a significant nutrition transition. I think we can remember our parents telling us how they used to eat minimally processed, lots of fruits, lots of veg, lots of ground provisions. And now, unfortunately, we have a diet that is composed of a lot of ultra-processed products, which Jonathan spoke about earlier, and the need for us to regulate those products. And why we need to regulate those products? They are high in critical nutrients of concern: salt, sodium, sugar, fat. And the thing with ultra-processed products, and notice I say products because some experts have actually encouraged us to think of them as products and no longer food, because they no longer resemble the food that we know to make the products. They have very low nutritional value, very high in calories, and again, they're high in these critical nutrients that we know contribute to the development of non-communicable diseases and obesity. This is literally what our environment looks like. You can let me know if this resonates with you in the chat. We see a lot of ultra-processed products everywhere. They're highly affordable, widely available, and pervasively marketed. And I think a lot of you are youth advocates. A lot of you really care about children's health. The pervasive marketing of these ultra-processed products is major, because we know research has shown that it impacts the preferences, children's preferences of the foods that they want, and then they pester their parents to buy these products. Children have quite a say and quite a voice when it comes to the food that's in their household. And unfortunately, this environment, which looks and feels like this, is what we're surrounded by. And when we look at that picture, that's one element of what we call an obesogenic environment, or an environment where it's unfortunately easier to make the unhealthy choice. And so that's why when we ask the question, what needs to be done, octagonal front of package warning labeling is one of a suite of policies that we really should be implementing. So what is front of package labeling? So I'm hoping, just so far, I've sort of answered the question as to why. I'll let that simmer for a second, and now we're going to start looking at the what. So I think we're all familiar with this image on the left, which is the back of a package, or sometimes it's on the side of a package, and this nutrition facts panel. If you've looked at one before, which I'm sure all of you have, it can be quite confusing. It's a lot of numbers in very, very fine print. And so that's why we have the front of package labeling system, in order to put facts that are supposed to be useful for us to make decisions at the front. And so that's why we have the octagonal warning labels as well, which we'll get into. Why do we have these labels? Just as I mentioned, we need to be able to inform consumers when they're making purchasing decisions. Again, I think we've all been there where we make decisions very, very quickly. And ideally, we should be able to make them quickly with the information that's provided on the front of the package. Labels should be legible, clear, and honest. They're an important tool for people living with diet-related conditions like non-communicable diseases. So again, I want you to think back to how I started this presentation, inviting you to think about that person that you know is living with a non-communicable disease. As you may remember, because you have probably personally lived with that person, or you might be living with a non-communicable disease. When you have that meeting with a doctor, you find out about your diagnosis. Ideally, you were looking at your diet and managing your diet before then, but if you weren't, you definitely need to from that moment on. And so it's so important for us when we're talking about food labeling to ensure that we're implementing tools for those persons living with NCDs where what they eat is critical. And as I mentioned before, what we're used to seeing is the back of pack. Sometimes, unfortunately, across the Caribbean, we might not even have labeling at all. But I think what we're mostly used to is the back of pack, which again, can be very difficult and challenging to read. So as I mentioned before, the front of pack labeling. Now, this is important. There are literally hundreds of front of package labeling, hundreds of them. What we need to be very clear on, especially for us in our advocacy for what is best for our Caribbean people, is decipher between hundreds of front of pack labeling and octagonal front of package labeling. It's very important, front of package warning labeling. It's very important that we make that distinction. So these are a number of the labeling systems. You can let me know actually in the chat some that you might be familiar with. We have the endorsement system, which is literally a little picture on the front of a package that endorses the product. Is that the most useful information? The summary systems provide an overview of the healthfulness of a product. The monochromatic GDA, which I think a lot of us might be familiar with, is providing the information that's on the back of the product on the front. The color-coded GDA, same concept, except it's adding colors. One thing with this, the color-coded GDA, is it provides no interpretive text. So as you can see here, we see red, we see orange, we see green, but we have no idea what those mean. The interpretive textual and color-coded systems, which we see here, again, we might be familiar with as the traffic light system. That is another labeling system, okay? Let me know if any of those are familiar to you, but those are labeling systems, which again, I'd invite everybody to remember another thing. The objective, thinking back to the very start of the presentation, is to be able to provide a labeling system that helps consumers, all of us, whether you're living with a non-communicable disease or not, quickly, easily, and correctly identify products that are high in those critical nutrients that we spoke about that are very high in ultra-processed products, sodium, sugar, and fat. The octagonal warning label, based on regional and international evidence, has continued to be the best in achieving that objective, helping people quickly, easily, and correctly identify products that are high in salt, sugar, and fat. In addition to that, it's rights compliant. And I'm so glad that Jonathan kind of centered us on this rights-based issue and how important that is for JYAN. We know that it's rights compliant. It respects the right to health, the right to safe and nutritious food, the right to information, because again, we're able to get from that octagonal label that says high in salt, high in sugar, high in fat, a clear understanding of the fact that this particular product is high in those nutrients. Also, the right to benefit from scientific progress. Again, as I mentioned before, there's so much research that has gone into developing this particular labeling system and determining that it is the best, especially for us in the Caribbean. We have a right to benefit from that sort of research with the implementation of the labeling system. And just to highlight here that the UN Special Rapporteur in 2020, and again, I believe in 2023, it was two different rapporteurs, would have highlighted that the front of package labeling system is a key tool in respecting that right to health. The front of package warning labeling system is also, the octagonal front of package warning labeling system is also equitable. There's been continuous research to show, including research done in Jamaica, that it is, no matter your socioeconomic status, no matter your education, no matter your age, it is something that is understood, which again is key for a best performing labeling system. And as I mentioned before, it is supported by the best evidence, importantly, evidence that is free of conflict of interest. And so you might look at the octagon with the high in salt, sugar, and fat and ask, how did we even determine what is high in? And that is determined by the PAHO nutrient profile model, which again determines the thresholds based on scientific evidence of what is high in. If you think about it, if we could visualize it, it would be the octagonal warning label holding hands with the PAHO nutrient profile, because they work very well together. And so as I mentioned before, it defines when products are high in sugars, fats, and sodium. It's based on the WHO population nutrient intake goals, which is adjusted in according to the energy requirements. So all of us have different energy requirements, and the PAHO nutrient profile model takes that into consideration. So it's not a fixed amount of calories, for example, per day, but it really is dependent on who we're looking at. So again, how did we get to determine whether a product is high in? It's that octagonal warning label holding hands with that PAHO nutrient profile model. And so let's talk evidence. Again, the beautiful thing, and I'm not sure if everybody is from Jamaica on the call, but the beautiful thing is not only do we have regional, international evidence, but we have local evidence of the fact that the octagonal front of package warning labeling system is the best system. So this study, which was done with PAHO, the Ministry of Health in Jamaica, and other partners, looked at a number of different labeling systems, because remember, there are hundreds, there are many, and they found that the PAHO, the octagonal front of package warning label, persons were able to best identify the least harmful products to purchase, and the least harm, and whether the product was high in those critical nutrients that we've been continuing to talk about. And again, they looked at different labeling systems, and the octagonal warning labeling system outperformed the others with those three things in mind. What's important for us to know as well, thinking about the equity issue, is that they would have looked at shoppers, 1,200 shoppers from across Jamaica, again, varying socioeconomic status, education, gender, as well as persons who actually lived with non-communicable diseases. They considered all of those persons when they were executing the research. So I think Jamaica should be really, really proud that they have this local evidence to draw on. Then we have a longitudinal study, which was done again by PAHO, looking at the impact that octagonal warning labels could have if implemented. And again, our shining star continues to shine. The octagonal warning labels, if implemented, could avert 16% of NCD-related deaths. That's major. I know we haven't spoken about it yet, but we know and we've heard of the economic costs associated with non-communicable diseases. 16% could be averted. In addition to that, and on the finance point, $732 million US per year could be saved if the octagonal warning labels were implemented. And along that line, similar studies have been shown in Mexico, where they saw an estimated reduction of obesity by 14.7% after 5 years of implementation, and a savings of $1.8 billion in obesity costs. So again, remember the two questions I asked you at the very beginning. I'm hoping that you can start to pinpoint and start to understand the why we're so passionate about advocating for the best labeling system. The Chilean example, again, Chile was really, really unique in that they implemented the front of package labeling system, as well as policies related to shaping a healthier food environment, including marketing restrictions. But in Chile, they found that there's a decrease after implementing the octagonal front of package warning labeling, a decrease in household volume of high sweetened beverage purchases by 23.7%, and a decrease in products with high in label from 51 to 44%. The data speaks for itself. I did want to highlight two things here, especially as we're talking about children and youth. You can read kind of the first scenario there, but it's essentially saying that children were telling their mothers not to buy the products that had the high in labels. And again, just to emphasize the voice of children and the power of children in what can be brought inside of the home. So that was well documented. And what we've also noted is that we saw a decline in the availability of these products in school environments in Chile. Again, not only is this something that can implement or impact your shopping experience, but it can impact the environments. Again, remember we were talking about that obesogenic environment, what it looks like. This policy, in addition to others, can help with that. Which brings me to, again, helping you to understand the what and why. Octagonal front of package warning labels not only is quite strong, but its strength is enhanced because it really helps to support other healthy food environment policies, which I know some of you are familiar with. For example, the first one with the healthy school policies, which I know a lot of us on this call are very, very passionate about, especially in the Jamaican context. We have, if we think about it, just think of a lot of prepackaged foods with the octagonal warning labels on them to determine whether that product is high in salt, sugar, or fat. It is so much easier to determine what should and should not be let into the school environment when we have those octagonal warning labels. Similar with the taxation of sweet beverages, you're able to easily identify which beverages are high in sugar. The marketing, again, similarly in Chile, has evidence to show that this can work by not marketing those products with those high in labels to children. And again, they've done this, and I can send you some research on that. So I'm hoping at this point, we have understood the what and the why. And I just wanted to end by, again, emphasizing that Kimberly Benjamin, our second speaker, will kind of go into the process that started in 2018 in terms of deciding on and implementing the front of package warning labeling, or rather deciding if we were going to implement the front of package warning labeling, octagonal front of package warning labeling regionally. She'll speak a bit more about the process, but I just wanted to highlight the tremendous efforts of advocates across the region. We've had a number of different partners, some who are on the call today, the Heart and Stroke Foundation of Barbados, the Heart Foundation of Jamaica, UNICEF Care, JYAN. We've had CARFA, and a number of other partners who have really, really lent their voices to this advocacy effort to get the best labeling system for our Caribbean people. And so pictured here is some of the efforts that have been captured from 2018. We would have had, again, you can see some key players here from CARFA, from UNICEF, campaigns that we would have had, campaign also highlighting industry interference in the process, which I believe Kimberly is going to speak to. We've had a number of petitions as well in terms of people, again, lending their support to this effort, and not just those in our immediate advocacy space, but those outside who saw how powerful this policy is. We've had NCD commissions sign on, and really importantly, we've had civil society and a youth voice really lending their opinion and their voice to this amplification effort of the power of this policy. And my second to last thing is just highlighting that if you are interested, and I think Kimberly will go into more detail on this, but if you are interested in really understanding the CARICOM process to get from where we were in 2018 to where we are now, I would highly encourage you to read one of our newest resources, which is led by the O'Neill Institute in collaboration with the Healthy Caribbean Coalition and UE Health and Law Research Unit. And it really does document this process. I think for us as advocates, it's important for us to understand the intricacies, who is at the table, what their role is, what their role should be. And so I'm encouraging you, and I can pop it in the chat, to have a look at this resource. And so to end, I'm hoping that I answered the what question, and hopefully you too can answer the what question. What is front of package warning labeling? And again, I want you to remember that there's a difference between front of package labeling, where there are hundreds of, and the octagonal front of package warning labeling. And so it's critical for us, even in our advocacy efforts, to ensure that we're not just talking about front of package labeling, which is useful, but the octagonal front of package warning labeling, which is the best. And it really does fulfill the objective of helping consumers quickly, easily, and correctly identify products that are high in salt, sugar, and fat. It is supported by local, regional, and international evidence, free, very importantly, free of conflict of interest. Again, for us on this call, I think the fact that it is rights compliant is critical, and the fact that it lends to being an equitable approach is very important as well. So I'm going to end how I started by inviting you to think of the situation. Think of not just that 75% of NCDs the stat that I mentioned before, but thinking about that person who we know, who's very close to us, who's living with a non-communicable disease, a person like Natasha, who has to be the one who's caretaking for her parents, who is the one who's purchasing decisions, and she herself we should be protecting by implementing policies that have shown to be the best. And so with that, thank you, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Danielle. It was a very engaging discussion. So we're just going to open up the floor just a little bit. Danielle, just stay on with us a little bit. Open up the floor for any questions or any suggestions. So any questions or comments that you'd like to pitch to Danielle. And Danielle, there was one specific comment. Someone asked us off air that you can lead us into a nice little like soca kind of Zumba. I don't know who the person is, but someone did.
Someone did. Okay, yeah. We can work on that for next time for sure.
Okay, all right, no problem. Just raise your hand, or you can just comment in the group if you'd like to ask a question, or you have any comments. Shortly after, we're going to start with our first group of trivia. So I hope you guys were listening.
No, John, I think there's a question. There's a question in the chat. Can you see it?
Sure. Okay. Well, give me a second. Okay. Yes. That question is, okay. Hi, Danielle. This is coming from Tad Davis. How have the companies reacted to the suggestion of front of package warning labels, the octagonal version specifically? Okay.
Thank you, Chad. Very good and relevant question. I think Kimberly is going to go into this in a bit more depth, but just to say that it has unfortunately not been positive. We've seen a number of manufacturers who are not thrilled with the octagonal warning labeling, specifically because, as you can imagine, and what I've described, it is a labeling system that aims to highlight whether a product is high in salt, sugar, and fat. And a number of these ultra-processed products that the manufacturers have are high in salt, sugar, and fats. And so we've seen that the industry has responded by trying to dilute the policy. I'll add to that they have been in the decision-making rooms, which I think Kimberly is going to speak to, the decision-making rooms where local decision-making bodies are determining what's next with the octagonal warning label. And so by being in those decision-making rooms, they have influenced the policy. And so the last standard that was shared with all of the CARICOM countries, it was actually, it ended up being, because ideally what we would want is the octagonal front of package warning labeling to be mandatory. And unfortunately, it was diluted into something that was voluntary. So that's one thing that we've seen. We've seen them respond in a number of different ways, but I do have to highlight in some instances, we have seen a positive reaction from the manufacturers where they see it as an opportunity for them to expand their healthy alternatives, which is something I think we need to applaud and encourage in terms of that reformulation, or in terms of them just being a bit more creative and leaning into that market. But yeah, we've had a number of instances of them delaying the policy, denying the importance and relevance of this policy. And again, that's why I started with what I did in terms of centering on people and health, because that really should be at the forefront. And unfortunately, we've seen instances where there has been profit put ahead of people. So I'm hopeful that those companies and manufacturing companies that are leaning towards the healthy alternatives can guide the other ones in that way as well.
Thank you very much for that response, Danielle. I think that was very instructive. Are there any other questions? Yeah, Chad also says thank you, Danielle. We also agree. Any other questions, comments? Okay. All right, so I guess we can move on to our first trivia coming out of Danielle's presentation. Yes, Alex is saying excellent presentation as usual. You can put a fire emoji if you really enjoyed Danielle's presentation and you felt like it was insightful. And just put a fire emoji in the chat. Yeah. Okay, or a celebratory emoji. That's good as well. All right, so here's how the trivia is going to work. So I'm going to ask the question, and the first person, Tavo, is going to tell us who responds first. So you're going to go to JYAN's Jamaica Youth Advocacy Network, which is at Youth Advocate JA on Instagram. And you're going to go to the page and you're going to go in the DMs, right? Now, the first person who can tell us and list the countries who have implemented front of package warning labels will be the recipient of an Amazon gift card. Yes. So the first person who can go into the chat, you go at DM us and tell us the countries that have implemented front of package warning labels, the octagonal version, all right? So let's go. And Tabo, you're going to tell me, you can just let me know who is the first person to respond. Rachel in JYAN's DMs on Instagram at Youth Advocate JE. Rachel, man, Rachel.
And Jonathan, in all fairness, I didn't cover this exactly in my presentation. I do have a picture, but you can let me know if you want people to do some extra research.
No, I know them. I know them.
Okay,
so
okay, Alex.
So I know you mentioned specifically Chile, I know, but I did put an article from Forbes magazine in the group that actually lists them. So I wanted to see who was paying attention to that article, and it had a lot of the information that was in your presentation. So if you also want to keep in, also want to win our next giveaways, I'd advise everyone to just take a little sneak peek on that article. It can give you some of the information that was said in the presentation said earlier. All right, Tavoy, do we have a winner? Okay. So Tavoy says Alex incomplete answer. Okay, he came first. Any more, Tavoy? You can open the chat and tell us what. Tavoy, you can open your mic and tell us who commented. Tavoy,
So we're seeing quite a few responses. But what I want to know is how many countries are you looking for?
You're muted, Jonathan.
Oh, you're muted.
Tavoy, the answers are actually in the article. I mean, it's 7.
7. Okay.
Which are all of them? I don't remember all of them.
In that case, the person with the most responses or the most number of countries would have only been 3.
Would have been?
3. That's the highest.
Okay, all right. And that was?
That was Alex, actually.
Okay, so that was Alex. All right. So I guess Alex is the winner of our
Thank you.
award. So yeah, or Amazon gift card. So
I'm
just to
taking
know,
the ball.
yes, and you could start that for you. All right, so the answers would have been Mexico, Peru, Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, Colombia, and Venezuela. So those are countries within the Caribbean and Latin American region. I repeat, they are Mexico, Peru, Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, Colombia, and Venezuela. So Danielle did give some comments on Chile and Chile. So in her presentation. So our next giveaway, just read the article. Reading is fundamental, everyone. And you might be able to get the next one, all right? So we're going to move on to our next presentation, but want to thank you again, Danielle, for your presentation and for always being, there and willing to educate us, all right?
Always. Thank you guys so much.
So our next presentation will be coming from Kimberly Benjamin. Yeah, she's a big lawyer and all of those things. So she's going to give us a legal perspective, but also talking to us about the front of package warning label process in the Caribbean and where we are and where do we stand in 2024. So Kimberly is going to give us a little bit of a rundown of the history and what are some of the policy considerations surrounding front of package warning labels. Kimberly?
Hi, thank you, Jonathan. I don't know about this big lawyer, but I'm happy to thank you for the invitation to join your session.
Kimberly, there's a saying in Jamaica that we love to say, like, small up yourself. When you're going in a taxi, we don't do that here. Okay? Everybody's a big deal.
Thank you, Jonathan.
All right, go ahead, Kimberly.
So I'm gonna try to share my screen and get us started because I think I only have 25 minutes and it's a lot to cover. So I've been tasked with looking at the front of package warning labeling process in the Caribbean and addressing this question about where are we in 2024, which is this year. And I put, this depiction is not, 100% to scale or representative of the octagonal warning labels, but, it's the stop sign. And I put it there to help us begin to think about whether we have stopped in the process or whether there's more to come. So that's the opening slide that I want us to visualize and think about as I go through. What we'll cover today, I always think this is important for presentations so persons don't feel lost. I'm going to be looking at the status of the CARICOM process, an assessment of that process, and Danielle would have referenced the report that I'll be relying on heavily, and then some recommendations. So helping us to think about whether we are stuck or whether there's a path forward. So the CARICOM process, this slide complements the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, Maisha Hutton in particular, and I'm grateful for it. I think it does a good job of just putting everything on the screen for us. I'm not going to talk about everything listed here, but it provides a good snapshot of what occurred. So we would have started this process in 2017. And even before that, I wish to mention that mandatory labeling on food was something that CARICOM would have discussed even back in 2007 as part of the Port of Spain Declaration. So, and then subsequent to that, we would have had the CARFA's 6-point policy package, which also addressed mandatory nutrition labeling. And then subsequent to that, at least two decisions of CARICOM heads when they do their annual meetings, they also would have discussed labeling. So front of package warning labels is not something that someone at the region just decided needed to happen. There are actually mandates that as advocates, as JYAN, that you can rely on to show, your leaders that, hey, this is something that you would have discussed in the past, even prior to the 2017 official start date of the CARICOM labeling process. So, but, this slide starts from 2017. So at least 10 years after Port of Spain, we're now getting some movement in the region. But it really was in 2018 that the actual revision of what is called the CARICOM regional standard, it was a 2010 standard, that there was movement to actually revise it to include those octagonal warning labels that Danielle would have mentioned in her presentation. And so that involved a regional technical subcommittee of PROSCU. PROSCU is the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality. It's a CARICOM institution. that is mandated to deal with labels. It continued, as you can see, for a number of years. In 2019 and 2020 was really where you saw a lot of movement at the level of advocates. So civil society, public health advocacy, they were building momentum, really attempting to hold the process to account, because we were already noticing some of what Danielle would have mentioned in her presentation in terms of like the interference of industry, and what I will get into a little bit later on in the presentation as well. And so civil society and public health advocates were really attempting to hold the process to account, especially where we were having the consultations at the national level through the national standards bodies and also the national mirror committees, which are just committees at the domestic level charged with kind of treating with the standard and discussing it and providing comments and so on back to the regional level. And of course, we saw that there were industry actors who would say that they're supportive, but then also, as Danielle would have mentioned, seek to undermine not only the process, but the standard itself, trying to water it down, trying to remove the mandatory nature of the octagonal warning labels and to push it into an annex rather than it being within the standard itself. So that kind of was the status quo between 2019, 2020, 2021. And I think you can really see then in 2020 as well, we had CPSO is here on the slide. A study is mentioned, but I want to highlight that it was in 2020 when the CARICOM private sector organization was actually established. And this is now considered a regional institution. So if you think about when you were children, at Christmas dinner, at least this is how it is in Barbados, you would have an adult table and you will have a children's table. So imagine at the adult table where all of the important discussions are happening, you have this private sector entity who is sitting at that table where the discussions are happening. So that's what happened in 2020. That entity was created. There is not an equivalent civil society entity of that nature at the regional level that is recognized by CARICOM. So that is something that I will flag coming up as well. But then we had in 2021, we had the finalization of a final draft standard. And from there, countries were allowed to vote on it and, you know, to comment on it and to vote on it. And it was then in 2021 that we had the first round of voting. So you can see here on the slide provided by Healthy Caribbean Coalition that in that first round of voting, the standard was not approved. And what that means is that it then could not be passed on to the next body at the regional level, which would have been quoted to kind of stamp it through to realization. So that did not happen. What happened in 2021 was that 3 countries voted against the standard, including Jamaica, unfortunately. 6 countries voted in favor of the standard, and then 6 countries voted 6 countries abstained from voting on the standard. And so instead of the standard being passed on and completed, they had to go back through the process again. And so we had that occurring then in 2022, where there was the continuation of the regional consultations on the draft standard. And of course, in between their industry did not play dormant. They were very active, and the same CARICOM private sector organization that I mentioned that was created in 2020 really came alive in 2022 by launching their own study, and I use study in inverted commas, about the front of package labeling that the Caribbean should have, in their opinion. Nonetheless, in 2023, the end of 2023, I believe it was in October when the second set of voting occurred in October. We awaited those results. January came, February came, and then it was in March that, again, not even publicly, but through the national standards bureaus and the mirror committees, that the outcome of that vote was known, at least at a superficial level, because we don't know the country details as far as I'm aware as yet. But we know as much that 7 countries in the region now in 2023, 2024 voted against the standard. So remember, back in 2021, it was 3 countries. So we increased the number of countries that were against the standard. We had 5 countries that voted for the standard, and then we had 3 countries that abstained. So I don't want to dwell too long on this slide, but it really was just to give you an overview of the status of the process today, and then also where, you know, the journey where we've come, because your history is important if you're going to define your future, in my opinion. So kind of just going back to that report that Danielle would have mentioned, because like I said, it's going to form the basis of a lot of what I say. And I just want to recognize as well Shadro Lake, who he, as a student, he would have started off this project when he was at Georgetown, and also when he became a fellow. So kudos to Shadro, he's a fellow Jamaican. So, and then also the institutions involved. So we have the O'Neill Institute, especially the Global Center for Legal Innovation on Food Environments, the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, and of course, the Law and Health Research Unit at the University of the West Indies. And what we really were attempting to do with this report was to analyze the near, as you would have seen, the near 7-year story of revising that CARICOM regional standard. What did it mean in terms of industry interference? What were the entry points and how we can address them? So the report really identifies the relevant players, and I've mentioned some of them in passing already. It assesses the standards development program, and I'm going to spend a bit more time here. It looks at brief normative considerations. I'm not going to cover that at all in today's presentation. And then it also considers conclusions and recommendations, which I'm going to spend a little bit of time as well on in today's presentation. So first, assessing the standards development program. This slide is another busy one, but I'm going to try to break it down as much as possible. And then, of course, you're invited to answer any questions during the Q&A. But just to start us off from the get-go, I would say that the regional front of package process was, if you imagine a scale, as you can see on the screen, it was always tipped in favor of vested industry profit interests at every stage. And I'm not saying that to be disparaging of any of the entities represented in the process or on screen, but I'm just saying that when you look at the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, which is the regional treaty that governs even the standards development program and who is involved, it is by its very nature a trade-related treaty. And so it's difficult to expect anything different. But so you can see on the slide that tipped, you know, weighing heavily on the scale are a lot of these entities here on the left, which are essentially trade-focused entities. The Council for Trade and Economic Development, I mean, by its name alone. So that's one of the main organs in CARICOM. The CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality, also known as CROSS-Q, whilst not a trade organization, because it is so closely connected and linked to COTED, inevitably takes on a trade body. And I know many of you would have heard the saying, you know, birds of a feather flock together. So you can kind of understand what's happening here at the regional level. And then, of course, CARICOM Private Sector Organization does not hide its true colors. It is a trade private sector organization. And then these national standards bodies, national mirror committees as well. When you go to their websites and you read about these entities, they actually describe themselves as trade or industry aligned in many instances. And even when we saw, if I take, for example, the Jamaica process, and this is the report, you can read it in the report for yourselves. If I take the Jamaica process, for example, we know that Jamaica's National Mirror Committee would have been made up of 5 categories of stakeholders. So there was the government stakeholder group, the non-governmental organizations, there was academia, the consumer groups, and industry and private sector. So, you know, at face value, that seems pretty, you know, like it's representing society as much as possible with these 5 different groups. But then if you look a little bit deeper, you would notice that even though there are those multiple stakeholder groupings, many of the entities represented within the different groups actually had trade or industry interests. So in the Jamaican example, the private sector, like I mentioned, they had their own stakeholder grouping, but they also had their interests represented in the government stakeholder group. So the National Compliance and Regulatory Authority actually describes itself as a statutory body that falls under the Ministry of Industry. investment and commerce, that i.e. trade. And then it also states that the Consumer Affairs Commission, describes itself, again, go to the website, you will see it there, as a government agency under the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce. So we are talking about balanced representation here, but then we can see when we delve a little deeper and we actually look at the persons involved, the entities involved, that there isn't genuine balance there. And same for so that's the national standards bodies, and same for the national merit committees. All of that to say that CrossQ in its process, it goes through these 8 different stages. So we have the preliminary stage, and it comes right down. It's really this regional body that is to develop and harmonize standards. CrossQ did that. It followed its directive 1, which is its main constitutive document. But even there, even in how CrossQ describes the standard, if we look at it in detail, which the report does, and I echo Danielle's sentiment that if you are keen on this area, that you do read the report, not because I was involved in writing it, no, but if you are keen, it's a good report to help explain the process. Because that directive actually mandates that the head of the head of the regional technical committee actually have private sector interests, or be well known, be renowned among the private sector. So it's almost in a way like you're setting up public health for failure, when so much of the process, so much of how things are constructed at the regional level, and even then at the national level, like I was mentioning regarding the national merit committees, are industry defined and industry interests are being represented. Nonetheless, the CrossQ process, like I was saying, goes through these different stages. In the preliminary stage, we're looking at the submission of a new work item proposal. So basically a new project proposal. So that would have happened, again, throw your mind back to the timeline I provided. That would have happened back in 2017 going into 2018. That proposal would have been submitted. And then in the preliminary stage, the proposal is submitted. In the preliminary stage, the proposal is evaluated by the national standards bodies. And again, those are government bodies. So at the national level, the national standard bodies are government bodies that are appointed for dealing with standards at the national level, but there's also that kind of cross-cutting and relationship with the regional level process. And of course, at the preparatory stage, then you have really the work of the committees that are involved at the regional level, preparing the draft standard, ensuring that it encompasses all that would have been discussed at the proposal stage among the national standards bodies. And once consensus is reached among the regional technical committee who would have been involved in the preparatory stage, then the working draft is actually submitted, and that goes to the committee stage, where the CrossQ Secretariat reviews it and then begins the inquiry stage. And I find when I looked at the process, it's the inquiry stage that you really see a lot of this activity, because the inquiry stage involves, again, the national standards bodies. And so they are then invited to review and to comment. And if like I was mentioning earlier, if the national standards bodies and the national merit committees are not composed in effective rules of engagement in place for such a multi-sectoral body, then you're going to encounter challenges. You're going to encounter power issues. Some instances from really being able to have their say in the process, or they're disconnected, they're not aware of some of the closed door meetings or some of the activities happening behind the scenes, which shouldn't be happening. Then if we go to the approval stage, this involves CrossQ circulating the draft standard to national standards bodies, again, for their final voting, for their vote. So this would have happened in the October 2023 period. It would have happened in 2021 as well, when we had those 2 rounds of voting. And it really requires a 75% positive voting rate So 3/4 of the CARICOM member states, the 15 CARICOM member states, must vote for the standard in order for things to move forward. And if things move forward, which in our case it didn't, but if it did, it would have gone to the publication stage. And then once published, there would have been a subsequent review period, I believe is after 5 years or something along that lines, but we haven't reached there. And why we haven't reached there is indirect relation, to all of these things mentioned here on the right side of the screen. So like I was talking about earlier, the trade and industry origins or nature of many of the entities involved, or even of just the revised Treaty of Chagarama. So that treaty that governs all of it, the trade and industry nature of that, I think precludes or prevents a lot of what we wanted to see as public health advocates, or even as those just supportive of the octagonal front of package warning labels. And then, like I mentioned, the composition of some of the bodies and the committees, especially at the national level, where we were talking about balanced representation, but a deeper analysis like the report does of who is actually in the room, who is at the table, the grown-up table, you're seeing that it isn't a balanced representation. And that impacts then participation or even non-participation of certain entities. And of course, that is well connected to the interest represented or not. And then, of course, there was also a lack of standardization within countries and across countries. So, and when we talk about a lack of standardization in the report, we're talking about the process for commenting, for voting, for validating information. We saw in some instances where, like the CARICOM private sector organization study, and how that information was then circulated at the national level as well, to try to influence the decision-making process in the national committees and at the level of the standards bodies. There was no process for what type of evidence or what type of information is allowable or not. We also saw that there was a lack of standardization regarding how information is published at the national level and also at the regional level, as well as access to information. So it's ironic because on the one hand, we're talking about a standard that, there are other rights that are implicated, like the right to information. And ironically, the process leading to that standard also was denying persons access to information and denying civil society organizations access to information. We also saw that there was a lack of standardization in terms of time frame and extensions. So some countries would have requested a little longer to vote or to get their votes in from the different stakeholder groups, whereas others were more timely with their submissions. And again, it begs the question whether some of that delay is directly or indirectly related to industry. So hopefully this slide, although there's a lot going on, you understand a little bit more some of the actors involved and also some of the tactics or the challenges, the entry points at all of the different stages, these different stages. I would say the 5 of them, because we didn't make it down to 7, 8, and so on. And the report, this is a direct quote from the report, and I'll just read it because I think is very impactful. An overarching entry point for potentially inordinate industry involvement is through any gaps in governance of such a multi-stakeholder standards development and harmonization process, including the general absence of publicly available written rules of engagement at both the regional and domestic levels. And this quote just basically sums up everything I said on the preceding slide, that it is those gaps in governance. It is the fact that we appreciate that the process, that the entities involved are trade related. And I don't think there's anything we can do about that. We can't go back and change COTED from how it was composed or its mandate. But recognizing that challenge, we do need to address the gaps in governance, and we can do that through written rules of engagement, which I'll come to when we look now at the recommendations. So the report again, helpfully it's not just a pity party. It's not just health advocates saying like, woe is us, this happened and there's nothing we can do about it. It actually provides concrete, feasible recommendations. I remember when we were discussing these recommendations, we were really, some of them got nixed because we were like, well, no, that isn't feasible, or we want something that the entities involved can really sink their teeth into and actually do so that we improve future processes, or even the current process. So at the regional level, we started with the CARICOM Secretariat. And why? Because this is really the administrative arm of CARICOM, of our region. It's the arm that sets meetings in health, in trade, you name it, it's the CARICOM Secretariat. So we felt as though, it was within the mandate of the CARICOM Secretariat to be able to develop those written rules of engagement. So we suggest in the report that they develop protocols and guidelines on how to organize and how to manage, oversee that consultation. So we know that the process is supposed to be consultative. That's not just a regional mandate. That's actually an international standard, operating standard. It needs to be consultative. But in order to do that effectively, so that power dynamics do not trump the participation of certain actors over others, we need to ensure that the consultation processes are official. There are no backdoor meetings, there are no underhanded ways of doing things, but there's transparency. And in order for those things to be established, there should be written rules so that, as advocates as well, you can challenge or you can, remind the policymakers of the rules that are in place, if the rules are in place. And so one of the things we suggest too is that in thinking about those rules, that they definitely incorporate how to identify and manage conflicts of interest involving, the entities under their remit. So the CARICOM organs, the CARICOM institutions, and associate institutions. And if you cast your mind back to the start of the presentation, we know that involved in the process were a lot of these entities. COTED is a CARICOM organ. PROSQ is a CARICOM institution. The same CARICOM private sector organization is one of the associate institutions. And so if CARICOM Secretariat were to establish these policies, then they would have a certain level of control over what happens or what doesn't happen. We also suggest in the report that the CARICOM Secretariat use its administrative power to explore measures that would facilitate or encourage meaningful engagement. And here we flag the importance of civil society organizations. I think this is critical because sometimes when we are working towards a policy, we want to see the policy pass so bad. And I think it's the civil society organizations that really carry the interests of those who will be affected. And when we're talking about front of package labeling, we're really talking about persons who are living with the experience of having an NCD. Those experts, I call them experts, and in a recent meeting, they were calling them experts because they're the ones who really have lived through it. They understand the highs and the lows of living with an NCD. And so the front of package labeling is for them, it's for all of us, but it's especially for those who are already in the throes of non-communicable diseases. And civil society organizations get that. They get that a lot better than sometimes policymakers, unfortunately. So having them at the table, moving them to the big boys and big girls table is important. And so we're recommending that the CARICOM SEC do that. And also that advocacy organizations like JYAN recognize the importance of pushing for that meaningful engagement and not sitting on the sidelines and saying, woe is me on the sidelines. We also have recommendations for COTED and COSOD. And here we're really talking about ensuring that those entities that are kind of public health focused, like the CARFA, like COSOD, which is the CARICOM organization for human and social development, that those entities really are engaged, especially when we're talking about developing and harmonizing standards of relevance for public health. It may not be every instance that they can get engaged, although for me personally, I think health should be in all policies. And so COSOD should be at the table when we're talking about regional policies in general. But we're saying, especially when it's a standard or a technical regulation with relevance to public health, that those entities that are pro-public health must be at the table consistently. And then, of course, we're also talking about the adoption of joint COTED and COSOD decisions. Why is this important? Again, we can see the power that COTED has at the regional level when it comes to standards. You know, they are the organ, and through them, CrossQ has its mandate, so it's trade focused. So having those joint decisions where a human and social development organ of CARICOM, which represents health interests, can be part, is important leverage, again, for advocates, because we could rely on those decisions and say, hey, look, policymaker, this is what was said on X date, and we expect to see it happen. Let me check time. Okay. CrossQ, in the report, we had the recommendations for CrossQ, sorry, abound. And that is, again, no reflection on the fact that they did something wrong in the process. That is not what we're trying to say, but we're suggesting that as the entity who is mandated to develop and harmonize standards, there's a lot more that they can do to ensure that the standard, the standards process will not be overthrown by industry interests. And so we suggest that, again, write things down, that they outline how the representation should be constituted at the National Mirror Committees level. So like I would have mentioned earlier, where you just have these stakeholder groups and everything looks pretty on paper, that they actually do a deep dive on who is actually forming part of those committees, and ensuring that the interests that are being represented is not skewed towards industry, but that they actually are balanced views at the national level. We also recommend that they adopt standard voting processes. This is not difficult, a very feasible recommendation to do. Write things down, pass them on to at the country level, ensuring that the countries know how the voting process should be done, how commenting on standards should be done, the fact that they need to produce meeting minutes, decisions need to be made available to the public channels. Again, all of these things are useful for us as advocates that we can rely on to challenge or to move the process forward. Because if things are not written down, it becomes difficult to challenge, and it becomes difficult to say, hey, this should be happening next. Why is this not happening? Currently, we don't have those processes officially written down in every instances, and in fact, very rarely. And of course, we again, linking it to the recommendation for the CARICOM set, everything should be written down, and the processes should be open, transparent, and fully supported by guidelines, allowing all stakeholders, especially the civil society ones, to view, to participate, to monitor, rather than being sidelined. And then the last two recommendations we have are that for CARFA, which is the Caribbean's public health agency, and in the process, well, in preparing the report, it wasn't always 100% clear. We know CARFA is involved, and at the regional level, they're a significant player, but we're suggesting in the report that CARFA's role, CARFA's power be elevated a lot more than it currently is, especially when we're referring to standards or technical regulations of a public health nature. And so we're suggesting that CARFA really be the entity to offer guidance to CrossQ on how to define standards with relevance to public health. And this becomes important when we're trying to say, well, when it is such a standard, we need to have these players in the room. So defining what that standard looks like, what it will entail, is important. We also are suggesting that CARFA should develop mechanisms that would enable it to support the national consultations. And so we know that there were consultations going on in the different member states. But again, because of the lack of oversight from the regional level into the national level processes, we're suggesting that here, this is potentially a role that CARFA could step into to help facilitate, especially when we're talking about the provision of technical assistance. That's CARFA's strong point. They are our regional public health agency at the end of the day. So providing that, including the generation of conflict-free evidence regarding the standard in question, would be very beneficial. And then for the University of the West Indies, which I'm sure we're all familiar with, leveraging UWI's research capability. So we have here in Barbados the Law and Health Research Unit, but we also have CARE in, I think it's based in Jamaica. We have law faculties across the region. We have public health research programs across the region. You know, can we see a future where these research institutions are leveraged, especially as it relates to standards. Again, providing conflict-free research. Industry does it. Why can't reputable academia provide conflict-free research to aid the process to move things forward? What about also these institutions' capabilities of helping us appreciate how can we arrive at a standard regarding access information or laws regarding access to information or preventing conflicts of interest? That's not so far-fetched to imagine, as there are experts in the region who are looking at these issues, but can we come together and actually create something that could be beneficial to these processes? And then, of course, we can also, of its own self, submit requests for the development of new standards or technical regulations. They don't need to wait for somebody else to do it, but they can get the ball rolling. And so the report really, I mean, I didn't even go through all of the recommendations in the report, but those are some of the ones I wanted to highlight for us as advocates. And just again, closing out this part of my presentation with this direct quote from the report, that if we are to change things in the region at the regional level, if we are to change things at the national level, then we're going to have to really look into strengthening the cross-Q standardization program. We're going to have to look at how we can do that in terms of privileging decision-making that is free from conflicts of interest. And of course, linked to that is the science that underpins it. And we're going to have to consider what are those good governance mechanisms that we can use. And here I'm referring to things that will increase transparency, which is currently lacking, that will foster accountability, again, lacking in the current process, and which will ultimately safeguard policymaking from vested interests. In another presentation, along similar lines to this one, I would have talked about the fact that the person or the entity who tells the best story wins. And the fact that when it came to front of package warning labeling, the octagonal warning labels, public health had the best story to tell. But somehow along the way, because of all that I would have mentioned, the challenges with this process, the entities involved, the fact that there were very little written rules of engagement, the story that was told at the end was not one of public health, but of industry interest. And I think there's still time to change the narrative. There's still hope. Even if we look at the national level, I think this is where I really conclude, at the national level, but whilst we're looking at the national level, keeping the regional level in mind, because guess what? We're going to have to go back to that regional process for the next standard. And if it's not fixed, we're going to encounter the same challenges again. So with that, I'll end there and pass back over to Jonathan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kimberly. That was if you guys found that also that presentation was insightful and informative, give her some applauses. Come on, guys, use up the features of Zoom. All right. So before you go, Kimberly, we just gonna set some time for some question and answers in case anyone has any comments or if they have any questions specifically to ask. So let's go. Is there any comments or questions? Going once, going well, I mean, really seem to be getting a lot of fire emojis.
Yes, but it's never a good thing when there are no questions, because it either means two things. Either it was clear or I was not clear at all and people just don't even know what to ask.
No, I think it might be the first one, that you were very, very clear. Because I thought you were very, very clear, and you spent a great time like giving us a good story about the history and also what's going on currently with front of package warning labels. Okay, so so I guess there are no questions, but we're going to Kimberly and Danielle, if you're still on the call, so we're going to do another quick giveaway. But before we get into the main giveaway, we have another small question. So you are, 1 second, give me a second. Okay. All right. So in Daniel's presentation, there was it was said that a certain percentage of deaths related to NCDs could have been avoided with front of package warning labels. Does anyone know the percentage? And you're going to do the same thing. You're going to go on JYAN's Instagram, and you're going to DM the first person with a response. So you're going to tell us the percentage. Sorry, the percentage of deaths that could have been avoided in the Caribbean if front of package warning labels were in effect. So, Savoy, you know what to do. Yeah, and let us know who was the first person to respond. And then Danielle and Kimberly are going to judge an exercise for us. Okay, well, Kimberly, Danielle has to step away a little bit, but Kimberly, and maybe I might ask Shannique to step in as our secondary judge. Okay. All right, so Savoy, has anyone responded?
I missed the portion of Danielle's presentation, Jonathan, but I remember reading this in the study, the front of study from Barbados. Is that where you're okay?
And it's also in the article that I put in the chat.
Okay.
Yes, also in the article that I put in the chat. So. And Daniel also placed an article in the chat, and it's also in that article.
So I'm seeing 2 responses.
Okay, let's hear them.
But neither of them seem to be the answer.
All right, what were the responses?
I'm seeing 75%,
okay,
86%, or 83%.
All right, so those are not the answer. If someone knows the answer, you can just put it in this chat. And first, who was the first person in the chat?
This is your opportunity to phone a friend.
Or read the article. Maybe read the article, but also remember Jonathan's question was that could be averted due to front of pack rather than NCDs as a whole, because I think some of those statistics sound familiar for the whole NCD.
All right, so I'm still looking over. I'm now seeing 70%.
Okay. Okay, so I guess no one really wants to give vote for. So Annalie answers. Okay, so Annalie answers, and that is 16%. So Annalie from here responded. And that is the correct answer. So guys, I'll encourage you to read both articles in the chat. One was from Forbes. So, you know, Forbes is a big international magazine. And to know that the Caribbean, the movement is being highlighted in this way on an international platform such as Forbes magazine, it's very important. Hopefully one day I'll be on Forbes magazine, maybe on the richest list. And you know, but yes, so we're going to go into our next activity, which is a fun activity. So we're going to need 3 volunteers, and here's what's going to happen.
Actually, John, I'm seeing a question now.
Okay, sorry. Some from Ralph Bogota. Let me know if I'm pronouncing your name properly. So the question is, one question: could Jamaica implement a local FOPL? I'm assuming that's a question about the legality of whether or not Jamaica can implement a front of package warning label. And if that's the question, I'll go over to you, Kimberly, and maybe if so, any of the other legal luminaries who also respond.
Yes, I can start off and then invite whoever else wants to chip in. So thanks for your question, Ralph. The short answer is yes. Jamaica and any other CARICOM member states, or even the CARICOM member state, can implement domestic or local front of package warning label laws. Why? One, the first and obvious answer to that would be because countries are sovereign. Countries in our region, the independent member states, are sovereign, which means that they have responsibility for the laws in their territory. So even though we just spent at least 25 minutes describing the regional process that we were attempting to take, yes, countries can. Actually, the regional process, regardless of the outcome, let's say the standard had passed, countries would still need to implement the regional standard domestically. And that implementation would have been through a law or regulation, subsidiary legislation, so kind of sub-law. So that would have had to happen regardless. I think, and in reflecting on your question, it begs the question, well then why bother with the regional process? And I think the important answer there is because the regional process was really trying to harmonize the approach, harmonize the standard, because it would have made sense for a region of 15 CARICOM member states to adopt the same standard. It would have made the exchange of goods a lot easier if everybody's carrying the same label. And you know that when you see this front of package warning label in Jamaica, you see the same label in Barbados, you know what it means, rather than there being different things, which is kind of what industry was beginning to spew towards the end. So yes, technically countries can implement their own. It could go through the parliamentary process, or in some instances, it can go through the Bureau of Standards at the national level. But the short answer is yes. Whether there's political will to do that is another question. I see Barbara's hand up, and so I'll pass over to her because she's an expert on this as well. Over.
Barbara, thank you very much for that, Kimberly. Barbara is the executive director of the Heart Foundation of Jamaica.
You give me a promotion. Global Health Advocacy Project. I am the project manager.
Oh, sorry, Barbara.
That's okay. So, as Kimberly said, the answer is yes. However, whenever we look at these things, regulations or laws, we have to put them into context. The Minister of Health in Jamaica could, using the Public Health Act, enact the front of package labeling. However, it is highly unlikely, because today's presentation, we haven't really talked much about industry. The industry interference is strong. And having failed at the Bureau of Standard level, despite all the work and all the advocacy, it's highly unlikely, but it could be done. So if there was a minister that really bought into the whole front of package labeling and understand the impact on NCDs, where we're seeing even that study in Barbados that showed that if you implemented the front of package, you would have a reduction in obesity levels or NCDs. So it's a moot question, but yes, but highly unlikely. Let me just be very realistic. We would love it. And Kimberly made a good point. It's really good to have that standardization and to have a regional standard, because going back to the tobacco standard, which I worked on for many years, once that regional standard was done in countries, small island developing states, they didn't have to go and make their own standard. They were able to adopt the cross-Q standard, the high image, the high res images of the pictures on the cigarette packs were available. So they were able to do it without much challenge, because, in the small areas, especially in the Ministry of Health, you have one person doing 5 different areas. You don't have anybody designated for tobacco control or even designated for NCDs. So that's the longer of the shorter answer.
Right, and Alex Johnson would also want to respond. Thanks very much for that, Barbara. We appreciate it.
Just good morning again, everyone. Just to add to what Mrs. McGaw said, and to respond to Ralph's question, the front of package labeling is what I would want to say easy for them to implement, in the sense that technically, practically, all they need to do is to change the labels, print new labels. That's exactly what they would need to do. But then, all the healthy implications, because I realize nowadays, and I use this very strongly that making people healthy is a bad thing, and promoting things that keep people living longer seems to be a bad thing. So we are in a space now where, you know, the coin is flipped. So it's no longer that we are pushing, and we say that we are pushing for healthier lifestyles and so. We're really not, you know, it's just a big talk. So for the front of package labeling, just as when they are having World Cup and those things, they print somebody picture, put on the thing, is the same way they can do that for the front of package label. And we were even discussing at the function at the UNICEF function that we had a couple weeks ago at Courtyard. We were discussing that, you know, they could even print a sticker if they don't want to do the rebranding and stick it onto the thing. So, you know, it is very easy if you're looking at it at a practical perspective, but they make it harder than it needs to be, because there is no health benefits that are surrounding it. And when people are getting healthy, it affects a lot of different industries or pharmaceutical, and the list goes on. I won't go into any conspiracy or anything like that, but, you know, it's really sad. And when he asked that question, it really jumped out at me, because I'm saying this is easy. It's very easy to do, but, you know, they make it something like it's rocket science. But it is very easy for them to do, Ralph. It's one of the easiest things they can do. Just print new labels. It's that easy, but they don't want to do it. That's where the problem is.
I believe there's a next hand up.
I don't know if you're referring to my hand. I just wanted to tack on to something Alex Johnson would have mentioned. And that is, it's borne out in, there's a PAHO report which looks at kind of the evidence behind front of package labeling and seeks to refute a lot of the industry arguments that are presented. And what Alex Johnson was mentioning just now is one of the arguments that, like he was saying, that industry presents. They say, oh, it's too expensive. But we know that industry, when it's Christmas, when it's Easter, in any major event, when it's around our festivals and crop over and so on, they change their labels. They incur those expenses to change their labels. So it's, again, like he was saying, just to support that point, that there is evidence to show that the costs and so on doesn't outweigh anything that industry is accustomed doing around their own, for their own profit-making purposes. So I just wanted to add that. And then also to go back a little bit to Ralph's point at the domestic level, especially in the Jamaican context, that where, yes, there's kind of this lack of political will, or like Barbara was suggesting, that you really do need a champion at the ministerial level to push things, but to encourage advocates to not give up the fight. Because I know, for example, JYAN, you're pushing for the school nutrition policy, and like when we think about octagonal warning labels, we think of them as this kind of enabling policy that would help other policies, that can support other policies. And so I think it's important to push for it still at the national level, because it will support your school nutrition policy. It will help schools and the Ministry of Education and Health and so on, who are involved in that process, to be able to identify which items should not be allowed in school, because it will have on that octagonal warning label. So I would say don't give up the fight. It's important. It's one of those policies that's important when we talk about taxes, fiscal measures. Again, the octagonal warning label is that kind of foundational policy that should be a priority in all of our countries.
All right, before we're heading for activity, we're trying to close off by 12 o'clock. We have another question here, and that's by Christine D. Aguilar. Their concern about the cost of healthier foods, because one of Danielle's points was that unhealthy foods are cheaper and accessible, which means, which means healthier ones are not. How does FOPWL reconcile that? So repeat, if they're concerned about the cost of healthier foods, because one of Danielle's points was that the unhealthy foods are cheaper and accessible, which means healthier ones are not. How does FOPL reconcile that? If you want to go, Kimberly, and there's anyone else who wants to also chip in and give a response. So that question was coming from Christine Bianca.
Yeah, thank you, Christine, for your question. It's one of those questions that always arise in these settings when we're talking about healthy food policies. And I think it's not unique to our region, I would say. Generally across the world, you would typically find that the healthier option tends to be a little bit more expensive, sometimes a lot more expensive than the unhealthy option. So it's a real question that we have to grapple with as advocates. That said, there are already some policy positions that we can think about to help mitigate some of that effect. So for example, earlier I would have mentioned the use of fiscal measures. So on the one hand, we have taxation as a fiscal measure, which can either add to the cost of things, but then there are also subsidies on the other hand, which is also considered a fiscal measure where the cost of certain things can be brought down by a government who would ensure that there are subsidies or some kind of benefit to those who are producing healthier options. So again, this is it almost seems a little pie in the sky, but these are genuine policy positions that we can adopt and in CARICOM, in our CARICOM countries to help mitigate some of what we are seeing really inequitable positions. Because when you think about it, in the NCD arena, in the NCD scenario, it typically is households with lower incomes who are in the unhealthy, usually cheaper options. So when we're talking about human rights, when we're talking about equity, we're also needing to keep in mind the fact that as we push for healthy policies, we need to also consider how we can elevate and promote the accessible accessibility, which is not only a physical accessibility, so persons have access to the items, but also economic accessibility so that they can actually afford to buy the products. And I would say that there is some, I would say, anecdotal evidence on my side, because I haven't read about it per se, but where you can find certain healthy options that are cheaper. So in the Barbadian context, at least, to buy an apple or a banana is certainly cheaper than to buy some of the snacks, or even now to buy our sugar sweetened beverages, because we have the beverage tax on them. So I would say it's not necessarily a blanket statement that they're always more expensive. A little digging, a little exploration of the options out there is helpful. I know that in the Barbadian context, which is my context, that some of the civil society organizations did some work on identifying healthy options and including those that are cheaper, are cheap, in people's minds. So that again is a tool that I'm not sure if it's actually publicly available. Perhaps I'll check, and if it is, if I find it or I can reach out to them for it, I can share it with Shannique or any Jonathan, any of the team from JYAN. So I just wanted to add that.
Okay. Is there any other comments?
No, I wanted to I had a question. I'm having a little bit of difficulty, like 4 minutes. That's why I didn't write it. But of course, Kimberly, really good presentation. Thank you so much. But I was just also kind of curious within the context of the original jurisdiction of the CCJ, if there is even like scope to consider any sort of intervention on this issue of front of package warning labeling from the CCJ perspective, especially when we think about regional trade and those sort of issues. I don't know if that's sometimes ever come up, or if there's even any consideration for how they may, I don't want to use the word strategic litigation, especially because Rachel, she just gets very excited when she hears that. But even just like an opinion, so to speak, from a CCJ perspective on what this sort of labeling, even if not so much, say, front of package warning labeling, but a standardization of labeling across CARICOM would look like as part of the CSME network.
Thank you, Shannique. Trust Shannique to bring the lawyerly question to the room. But thanks for your question. it is one that we have thought about a lot, even in preparing the report that we would have shared. And actually one of the recommendations in the report, which I didn't, like I said, I didn't mention all of the recommendations, but one of them is the fact that, you know, the CARICOMSEC or one of the member states can pursue an advisory opinion. But to back it up, because I'm not sure of who is in the room in terms of their profiles, but just to make sure everyone understands when Shannique mentioned the original jurisdiction of the CCJ, she's referring to the Caribbean Court of Justice, first of all, and there are two jurisdictions there. So you can imagine that it's one court, but it operates in two different spheres. So there's the original jurisdiction sphere, which Shannique is talking about, which deals with everything related to the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. And I would have mentioned this treaty in my presentation, and it's that kind of governing treaty of our region. It's the founding treaty. It's that which we operate on at the regional level. So the Caribbean Court of Justice has exclusive and interpretive jurisdiction, meaning that they are the entity that interprets that treaty. So if there are any doubts, whether at the national level, it must go to the CCJ. They have exclusive jurisdiction. But there's also the advisory, appellate jurisdiction, sorry, the AJ jurisdiction. And this is where only, I think, 5 countries in the Caribbean to date have signed on to that particular jurisdiction.
Not including Jamaica.
No, not including Jamaica. Jamaica tried, there was a referendum, it didn't pass at the national level. But other countries like Barbados, Guyana, St. Lucia, Dominica,
I think Belize.
somebody else. Sorry?
I think Belize, I'm not sure.
Belize, yes, have signed on, thank you, have signed on to the appellate jurisdiction of the court. And what that means, like if you think of Jamaica's court system, your highest court, the Privy Council, the highest court of those 5 countries will be the Caribbean Court of Justice. So they can pass, whether it's a constitutional claim, administrative law, whatever, through to the Caribbean Court of Justice. Jamaica, unfortunately, cannot. That said,
just to quickly add, that for at least the Jamaicans in the room, it was through the original jurisdiction that we'd have had the Shannique Mary case, that I think most people know about, quite popular.
Yes.
They would have been interpreting the right for free movement within the CARICOM states by CARICOM nationals.
Yeah.
As a issue under the revised treaty.
Yep. So, and I like that you bring up the Shannique Mary case, because connected to that is the fact that in that case, if you go and read the decision of the Caribbean Court of Justice, the court doesn't close the door completely on the litigation of human rights in its original jurisdiction. So it poses an interesting question whether there could be something there. I think it will be extremely challenging, but not necessarily impossible, but extremely challenging because it has not been done before. Not saying that it can't be done, but I think a better approach, or an approach that would bear some fruit without kind of years of doing case mapping and everything that goes into litigation. So a more feasible route, and like I mentioned in the report, we mentioned feasible recommendations. We actually recommend requesting an advisory opinion from the CCJ about not necessarily the regional process, but about maybe even the objectives. There are 6 objectives listed in the revised treaty, one of which includes functional cooperation in matters of health, and really asking the court to interpret what that means in today's context, when we have NCDs that are causing, you know, the latest 80% of deaths in the region, or where we have a front of package labeling system that could have prevented 16% of deaths. You know, how should that objective of the treaty be interpreted? That is really a question for the court to answer, because it is in relation to the revised treaty. So that's something that the report does mention, does reference, and something that could be worth pursuing. It isn't, like you said, Shannique, it isn't litigation, but it is an approach that could hold some merit, at least for advocates to get clarity. Of course, when you're even in requesting that advisory opinion, there are certain limitations, there are certain restrictions as to who can request an advisory opinion. It isn't any and everybody off the street. It's usually a party to an existing dispute, a CARICOM member state. And again, all of the requirements are listed in the revised treaty, or if it's not in the revised treaty, it would be in the agreement establishing the court. Like there's actually a treaty, an agreement that establishes the Caribbean Court of Justice, and it's all laid out there. but I think it's worth exploring to see whether, you know, that can be an approach that we take, especially for countries that have not voted in favor of the standard, or for countries who abstained. You know, maybe it is we can at least push. Maybe there's political will for at least understanding what is possible. What does this objective mean, and in relation to front of pack or otherwise. Over.
Okay.
All right, no problem. Thanks much for that, Kim. So Danielle had placed, Danielle's back, so Danielle had placed some resources in the chat, so you guys can use them, and like you can get access to them and read them if you want to learn some more. All right, so we're trying to wrap up for 12, but we want to do our activity quickly. Oh wow, there's another question. Okay, so this question is coming from one second. Doneve Cohen. All right, so hi, this is what? This is, right. 1 second. All right. Hi, this is my first time. Doneve Cohen writes, hi, this is my first time learning about FOPL and my first webinar. In a very concise synopsis, this FOPL campaign is for the change of labeling on products to show how its content, rather than to change the contents of the product, help us to choose wisely what we consume, right? So yes. Oh, so Danielle, I don't know if you want to just confirm if this synopsis, if you're looking in the chat, you will see Donnie puts a synopsis based on what she feels that she has understood from this chat. I really appreciate that, Donnie. Your comment. Danielle, I don't know if you just want to make a quick comment.
Yes, very quick, because I know we're tight for time. Donnie, it's a very, very relevant question. And yes, the intention for the octagonal front of package warning labeling system is to help consumers make informed decisions about the food that they're going to consume. And what we've seen, according to research, is that the warning labels actually help people to take a pause, and in some instances reduce the amount of those products that they consume, again, with the overall objective of addressing non-communicable diseases. But yes, the intention is for it to help inform consumers about the content of the critical nutrients in those foods.
Okay. Thank you very much, Danielle. So we're gonna do our activity quickly now. So we want to, yes, you're welcome, Danielle. Donnie, sorry. So we're going to do our activity quickly now, but before we go into our activity, you might see a poll come up on your screen. We'll ask that you guys just fill out that poll so we can get some feedback from you guys, because you guys, you know, we serve you and we're doing customer service, you know, advocacy is customer service, and it's important that those of you who are, who have spent your time to engage us, that we were serving you well and that this was effective. So we want to know what we can do better going forward, and how did you find the session. So please fill out the form for us. It not will take too long, just five little questions. Won't take too long. You get multiple choice, so you have a little push right there. All right. Now our activity is going to be a quick elevator pitch. So we want 3 people to volunteer. Just put your hands up, and we want you to do an elevator pitch, policymakers, in the Caribbean country of your choice, as to why they should implement the octagonal front of package warning labels. And you will also be given a really nice Amazon gift voucher. So let's have some volunteers, not all at once, but while our volunteers are coming, just please remember to fill out our form. But thank you again, Kimberly, for your presentation, and Danielle for also answering the questions from our audience. Do we have any volunteers?
Can you repeat the activity, please?
Okay, so you're going to do an elevator pitch to policymakers of a Caribbean country of your choice as to why they should adopt rather the octagonal front of package warning label. So you're going to do an elevator pitch, which is 30 seconds, and you're going to tell, it's basically a public speaking competition, just fun. You can do it in your own Caribbean vernacular, because guess what, over here, standard English is not the only thing we accept. We accept your Caribbean language, and you can add color and flavor to it, all right? So do we have any volunteers?
Jonathan, there are two raised hands, Ronaldo Blake and Natalia.
Okay, so we have Ronaldo Blake, Natalia Burton. Okay, I'm going to give you guys a minute, and what's going to happen is that, so we're going to ask everybody to just comment after both have presented who you think is the winner, but also we're going to ask Danielle and Kimberly to give us a little feedback as to the presentations that we're giving. Just a short feedback, because it's 12 o'clock, we want to end very soon. But yes, so we're going to give you guys a minute. It's now 12:01. At 12:03, we will start our presentations. But in the meantime, again, we're encouraging everyone to fill out the form with the poll. So you can give us some feedback as to how you enjoyed the presentation today, or what do you think JYAN can do better, okay? There are criteria for judging. Well, you see, the thing is, because we're doing a popularity contest at this point right now, it's just vibes, as Shannique says. So we just want to hear from you guys. Who were you most convinced by? So we have Natalia Burton, who's one of the JYAN advocates. She's a member of the Jamaica Youth Advocacy Network Advocacy Council. And we also have Ronaldo Blake, I believe. Okay, well, yes, so Ronaldo Blake, I know he's a debater, so let's see. And both of them I know to be very popular on the Jamaican debating circuit. So let's see if they can lift up the So you remember, you'll have 30 seconds to present. In the meantime, is there one of you that would like to go first? If we're going to do this heads or tails, I don't. Shannique, what do you think?
mind going first unless Natalia has a preference to go first.
Okay, Ronaldo, you say you don't mind going first. Okay. Well, we're going to start now. So guys, remember, so after we're done, I'm going to ask you guys to put in the group, you're going to just place the name of the person who you thought gave the best elevator pitch, which will be 30 seconds, convincing the country, the policymakers of a Caribbean country of their choice as to why they should adopt the octagonal front of package warning label. All right, so Ronaldo Blake is going to go first. All right, so Ronaldo, give me a second. All right. Okay. So your time starts, we're going to give you 3 seconds. Are you ready? The mic is open and everything?
Yes, Jonathan, I'm ready.
So then we're going to start it.
Wait, before the time starts, should I state who I'm making the pitch to?
Well, we'd love that. Who is that? Who are you making the pitch to?
Yes, I'm making it to the Trinidad and Tobago government. I can't remember their commerce minister now, so that person.
Okay, that person. Okay. All right, so 1, 2, 3, you can start.
There are 5 important reasons why we should implement front of package octagonal food labels. 1 is that the evidence shows that they work. 2 is that they will have a positive impact on health outcomes. Additionally, this will benefit public health in general because governments in the Caribbean that are already generally highly indebted don't have to spend as much money taking care of people with diabetes and hypertension. And we'll move away from a system whereby there's a lot of public gain that is with manufacturers and towards a system whereby the public does not have to pay for these problems that are created by and perpetuated by manufacturers.
All right.
As Trinidad and Tobago, we can set a trend for the rest of the region. Thank you.
The elevator has stopped. It's time for you to come off the elevator. All right. So Ronaldo Blake, Kayla, please remember after the presentation. Okay, that's when we make comments. All right. So our next person is Natalia Burton. So thank you very much, Ronaldo, for your presentation, for your elevator pitch. All right, so we're going to start again. Natalia, who would you be doing it to? Well, who would you be pitching to? You can unmute your mic, Natalia. Natalia?
All right, am I being heard now?
Yes, we are hearing you now.
Okay, so I am pitching to Jamaican stakeholders.
Okay, so we have Trinidad and we have Jamaica. All right, so we're going to start in 3 seconds. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right, let's go, Natalia. 1, 2, you have 30 seconds. 3.
Picture this: octagonal warning labels, a bold move towards safety and awareness. With their distinctive shape and clear messaging, they grab attention instantly. Imagine the impact on public health in Jamaica, with these labels effectively warning and informing consumers about products high in sugars, salt, and saturated fats. Regardless of age or socioeconomic standing, the goal of these warning labels is to ensure that everyone is able to make informed decisions.
Okay, all right, Natalia. All right, so Natalia and Ronaldo. So starting now, Rosanna, after the pitch. So starting now, everybody's going to put in the group who is the winner. So you're going to call the name. It's not, I don't need, no compliments, no. So what counts as a vote is just the name of the person. So you're going to put Natalia or Ronaldo. Starting now, all right? And Tavo, you're going to count up for me and tell me who has the most amount. Kayla, that's not a vote, please. Wow. My pregnant, okay, so tell us if I didn't read that. We have 1 more minute to vote. You cannot double vote, everyone. So if you double voted, please vote again. I.e. Kayla right. Kayla right. Okay, we have 30 seconds left to vote. So remember you're counting our tab. So you're gonna let us know who the winner is. All right, so I guess our votes are done. So Tavoy, tabulate for me and tell me who was the winner. Mr. Barrett? All right, so the EOJ is in. So we are seeing a win for Natalia at 10 votes. Okay, nice. All right, so Natalia Burton, she's the winner of our elevator pitch competition with a valiant effort for Ronaldo at 4 votes. Okay, thank you very much, both for participating. You both will be given gift vouchers. It's just that one will be higher than the other. So I don't know. I hope that you'll be able to get something in time at Trinidad while you're there. Recount for Ronaldo. Okay. Mommy Bowden says recount. Not to be mentioned as both competitors voting for each other. Yes, and that's important because we're all in this together to ensure that we provide a healthy food environment for all our Caribbean people, but particularly for our young people. So that's very important for us. So we want to thank everyone for coming out. I'm just going to hand over to Shannique in 1 minute. Shannique can just give a vote of thanks. I want to thank you all for coming out. I want to thank the partners, Heart Foundation of Jamaica, Healthy Coalition of the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, rather, Caribbean Health Research, Caribbean Institute for Health Research, the Jamaica Global Health Advocacy Incubator, yes, and the National Secondary Schools Council, and JUTS. I want to thank all the JYAN advocates who came out and everyone else who came out, from whether you're in Jamaica, they are foreign, whether they are Caribbean foreign or big foreign. Thank you all for coming out. And specifically, I want to thank our speakers or presenters for today, Miss Danielle Walwyn, always knowledgeable, always willing to share that knowledge, and Kimberly, our big lawyer. I know she said we must call her a big lawyer, but Kimberly, a big lawyer, Kimberly, for giving us a really good rundown of the history of front of package warning labels. So if you really learned a lot today, just put in the comments learn. Just put learn. L-E-R-N. Okay. And if anybody comes and says anything, L-E-R-N. I know it's spelled L-E-A-R-N, but no, learn, guys. No one not following instructions. Thank you, Kayla. Learn. Well, learn. And yeah. Okay, since we have some people that want to be English policies, only can write it with the A. All right, so Shani, you'll just come in quickly and just give a quick vote of thanks, and then and some last comments, and we will close up. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, John. Can you hear me and hear me well?
Yes.
Beautiful. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you. I'm seeing Ralph's comment. Big up Danielle and Kimberly, and Ralph, I'm echoing your sentiment. Thank you, ladies, so much. You guys were just so amazing, and you said yes. And thank you so much to everyone who took the time from your morning to be with us. I understand that 1,000 other things demand your attention, but you took the time from your schedule not only to just join and sit online, but to engage in the conversation, to send your questions, to send thumbs up, to send learn in the chat. So thank you so much for coming out. Thank you for everything you've done. We'll be sending you follow-up emails, especially with the resources that we posted in the chat, just in case you want to continue reading. And also, if you have any other questions or concerns, I think it was Danielle asking about FOPWL, that this is the first time she's ever really heard of it. So if you want to be a part of the movement, if you want to work with us, if you want to be a part of our advocacy, we are welcome and open, and we'd love to engage more young people on this topic. So thank you so much. Thank you, John, for hosting. And I know so much is going on your side, but you decided to come and to come good. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for a great session, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
All right, thank you very much, Shannique, and I want to thank Shannique for giving the executive director of the Jamaica Youth Advocacy Network for giving the opening remarks. So, by the way, if you're not aware, the Jamaica Youth Advocacy Network, alongside UNICEF and Heart Foundation of Jamaica and Feeble Children, is hosting a creative writing competition for primary age students. So you can go on our page, you can look and register. If you know any children who are into creative writing and poetry and short stories, want you to go. We have some really nice prizes. We definitely will be publishing the work in the children's zone. We want to ensure that we're engaging the arts in the advocacy. You know, activism is very important, especially when engaging young people and children. So make sure you bring your cousin, your auntie, if your auntie teacher wants school, make sure you tell us, make sure some of the students join the creative writing competition. And if you're a teacher at a school, make sure you get somebody. If you have a little brother, bring in everyone. All right. So the deadline has been extended to May 31, moving from which would have been May today. The deadline would have been today, but it's been extended to May 31. So you have more time to get as much children as you can engage in the competition. So I want to thank you guys, everyone. Want to bless up everybody and make sure say your lunch nice and healthy, and you're eating the rainbow. All right. So big up on yourself, everybody. And it was my pleasure moderating for you.